I'm happy to report that on Monday the 20th, I celebrated 10 years. 10 years of consistent abstinence in Overeaters Anonymous, 10 years of commitment to that fellowship, along with Al-Anon and adult children. And I'm really pleased about it. But for me, it's just one day at a time. That's what we always say. So I'm going to whip through a lot of this because some of it's pretty obvious, and a number of you obviously are working in the field already, so we already know where addiction begins. Certainly it's about peer pressure, it's about family, it's about a lot of different things, life stressors. People see addiction as a treat or a reward. Addiction cuts across all modalities, all socioeconomic factors, all genders, age, religion, race, doesn't really matter. Why does addiction continue? Patterns of behavior, once formed, it takes at least 3 weeks to unform due to psychological and sometimes physical dependency issues that can be nicotine, caffeine, heroin, many of the other ones. Sometimes it's not necessarily physical dependency. Psychological dependency is pretty powerful stuff. You know, if we're spending 70 to 100% of our time thinking about the addictions, it's a 4-part process. We're thinking about the addiction, we're trying to figure out when we're going to do the addiction, we're trying to find the means to do the addiction, and then we're spending the rest of the time figuring out when we're going to do the addiction again. So it's pretty ongoing, as you can imagine. All right? So coping strategies for survival, avoidance, dissociation, and escape. They may be maladaptive, but we see them as working. Okay? So, of course, the addiction is going to affect a person's life not only because of the actual behavior, but now we've got 2 problems. We've got the problem that was the reason the addiction became a part of a person's life, and now we've got the addiction and the problems that causes. For example, if an alcoholic is drinking to relieve stress, and then the alcoholic goes out and drives home from a bar drunk and gets a DUI, there's the 2 problems, all right? So the stress is the primary problem that started the addiction in the first place, all right? And then the DUI is now a secondary problem created by the addiction, so just to give you an example. Okay, and here is the root of everything about addiction behavior. These are the big 4 feelings right here. This is at the heart of everything I talk about with clients. Lonely, sad, scared, and angry. Folks, this is it right here. These are the hardwired feelings, along with happy, with which we are born. We come out of our mothers at birth, and these are the 5 feelings that are with us. Happy, lonely, sad, scared, and angry. Obviously, happy isn't going to be a reason why people turn to an addiction-based behavior, but these other 4 are pretty powerful. And if anybody has ever felt any of these feelings and just tries to sit with them, that can be excruciating. So what are we going to do? Anything we can to distract ourselves away from lonely, sad, scared, and angry. And we're going to talk a whole lot more about those. And that is exactly what I do with clients. They come in the door, let's be real, nobody comes to therapy because it's all sunshine and puppies in their lives. It's more about why am I feeling these feelings? These feelings are a problem with me. So it's really, when we really work on this, when I work on this in treatment with clients, we're working on the addiction behavior, we're working on the belief systems that go along with that, and we're also working on lonely, sad, scared, and angry. And I'm going to talk about an exercise a little bit further along that you can do with clients anytime you want. I do this for myself every single day, and it's basically a feelings journal where we document feelings, and I do this with clients all the time, and when they're really attuned to it, what it's doing is keeping them in the moment, keeping present. We're always talking about just for today, just for this 24 hours. I can do anything for 24 hours, I hope, you know, and assuming that maybe 7 or 8 of those hours I'll be asleep, so the rest of the time just for 24 hours. So when you talk to an addict, you talk to somebody with addiction-based belief, a lot of times we'll say one day at a time rather than saying forever. You're not going to tell a heroin addict that they're never going to be able to use heroin again forever. They don't want to hear forever. All they want to hear is, how am I going to get through the next 15 minutes? You know, you're not going to tell a codependent person they're going to stop rescuing people for the rest of their lives. Never going to happen. But I can ask a codependent person who's involved in toxic relationships, what can you commit to for the next 24 hours? And this is how we break it down in measurable, you know, we don't talk about all about measurable, reachable goals. You know, we're always talking about that in treatment. Well, the same thing is true in addiction also. So I already mentioned this. In what ways does a person with addiction work differently in treatment? They're going to be really defensive. Because, and you will hear this all the time, you'll hear somebody talk about their addiction or their addiction-based behavior like Gollum talks about my precious in The Lord of the Rings, right? This is how it sounds. I mean, I've heard people do this. I remember I've heard people do this when they have a serious dependency on psychostimulants like Adderall or other medications for ADHD, for example. I've heard people say to me, I can't live without my Adderall. When does that not sound like Gollum? Okay, so for anybody who's read The Lord of the Rings or seen the movies and you know what I'm talking about, and if you don't, just hold in your mind that somebody's talking about my Adderall, like it's a gift or this precious thing that they have to hold on to. Well, that's the way people feel about addiction. Okay. So then we get into, these are the process addictions. I put them here first because these are the ones you're going to see. Many of you might not be working with active substance addicts, but you're going to see a whole lot of other stuff. This last one, cutting and other self-injuring behaviors, my goodness, how many of us are working with teenagers? I just had a teenager not too long ago who came in and talked about how she's cutting, and she sent photos of her cuts to her mother on her phone, right? So it's all that kind of thing. Social media, huge, huge problem in our society today. How many times a day do you look at your phone? How many times a day do you check your Facebook? If you've ever stopped to think about how much of that is addiction-based behavior. Toxic relationships, not only in romance, but also in friendships and family of origin. Wow, that can be huge. How many times have I talked to people who have a history of molestation in their family of origin, but they can't imagine spending Christmas without the perpetrator, right? So all these kinds of things represent the process addictions, all right? And then if we look at the next slide, we're talking about the substance, all right? Now, for me, these are the easy ones. Believe it or not, to talk about substance addiction, primary addiction work, this is pretty simple. In another slide that I have, I'll just talk to you about it. In AA, for example, all we ever say to people in AA, there are 4 things. Don't drink, go to meetings, find a sponsor, ask for help. You don't need alcohol to live. You don't need methamphetamine to live. You don't need heroin to live, right? But you do need food. And sometimes you do need to spend, in order to, there are things you need to have. It's tricky with some of the process addictions, I think, because there's so much a part of our culture. There's so much ingrained in our culture. Social media, for example, going back to what I said earlier. All right? So moving out into addiction. This is what an active addict's life looks like. That's it, folks. That's it. Addiction, 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 all day long addiction. Now, here's what an active addict's perception of life looks like without the addiction. When I used to work in the detox unit years ago, I used to do this exercise on a whiteboard, and you can do this with your clients. Take out a piece of paper, draw a big box on the piece of paper, and just write the word addiction in it. And of course, whatever client type you're working with, you can put whatever the word is. So a lot of times I'll work with codependent people, and we'll talk about the relationship that they're in, that they really need to release from. So I'll write the word addiction in this box. Then I turn the paper over and I draw another box, and that box is empty. And I ask the client to say, okay, what does that life look like? And they say, well, it's empty. Great. Then what I do, here's the next slide. When a person is working a program of recovery, I start drawing boxes, and I'll put all these words on this slide into each of the different boxes, right? So I have these boxes, and I just keep filling them up, and I'll ask the client to give me more ideas and suggestions for the boxes, okay? So then we keep going. But wait, there's more. Look at all these other things you can fill your life up with. But what I hear from clients all the time, is when they are thinking about what it would look like to let go of the addiction, and they see that empty box, what I hear them say all the time is, well, if I'm not participating in my addiction, then I'm bored. Okay? I read in a magazine one time, Tommy Lee Jones was quoted as saying he told his children whenever they would come to him and say they were bored, he would say, only boring people are bored. I don't think anyone's boring. So for me, what I like to do is talk to clients about changing the word bored to the word scared. And this goes back to lonely, angry, sad, and scared, because what they are is scared. What are they scared of? Feeling those feelings I just mentioned. But if they're working a program of recovery, look at all the boxes, and you can do, like I said, you can do this exercise on a piece of paper. So you draw the first box, you put the word of the addiction in it, you draw the second box, that's the empty box, right? Then you draw another piece of paper, use another piece of paper and draw a lot of different boxes and start writing these different things on from these slides, right? And you can add as many, the list goes on and on. You can do as many as you want. Okay, now, getting into what AA is all about. So people are always asking, well, where's the evidence-based practice? We're always talking about evidence-based practice, all right? Look at this. Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob Smith met in the 1930s, okay? Since the 1930s till today, 2017, AA has never gone away. To me, how much more evidence do I need than that? And if anybody needs to ask any other questions, all right, so I'm living proof. When I went back to the rooms, when I went back to 12-step 10 years ago, they were still there. They'd never gone away. I chose to leave. That was my decision because I'm a card-carrying addict, and I don't want to do it, somebody else's way. I think I can do it my way. But the bottom line is, AA has been around since the 1930s without any break, without any deviation. It's just been growing and growing and growing. And it's all over the world. Right now at noon, somewhere in the world, in a million different places, there are meetings happening right now in all the different fellowships, not just AA. If you look online, if you just go online and you just say AA Denver, just Google that, the website will come up that gives you a list of meetings starting as early, I think, as about 5 in the morning. And there are meetings all day, all the time until about midnight around here, just in Denver. Denver may be a pretty big party town, but it's a really strong AA town too. One of the things that I like to do, not only as a recovering person, but also as a provider of addiction-based therapy treatment, is I like to know where the good meetings are. Who am I going to ask? I ask my clients. So if I send a client out to an AA meeting, and I'll say to a client, all right, so try an AA meeting, and then they come back in and they say, I went to that AA meeting. I'll ask them, what did you think? And they'll tell me what the topic was, and we'll talk about whether or not that meeting has good recovery. How can you do that as a therapist? Go to a meeting. Choose an addiction. Choose an addiction meeting that seems to be most resonating where you happen to be at, because, okay, part of my belief system is we all have an addiction basis to something. I'm not saying every one of us needs to be at Harmony for, Facebook addiction, but I'm just saying that there are many opportunities to go to open meetings, and you don't go there and announce, oh, I'm here as a therapist, I'm checking out this meeting for my clients. What you may want to consider instead of that, and this is just a suggestion, is to just go in as a newcomer. And newcomers, that is the scariest thing. I will never forget for the rest of my life the first meeting I ever went to. I will never forget how many people were there. I'll never forget where it was. I'll never forget what I heard, what I saw. And so in order for you to experience what your clients experience, I'd like to suggest that maybe you can try doing that for yourself, because I got to tell you, going to that first meeting is the scariest thing in the world. I've circled the block a number of times. I didn't want to go in. And I've had clients tell me this. I'm a therapist for 25 years, and I've had clients tell me the exact same thing. So isn't it nice, in my experience, to be able to say to my clients what they might want to try, in order to get comfortable with the idea of going to a meeting, all right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So then, all right, so Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob Smith started AA in the 30s, and Lois Wilson, the wife of Bill Wilson, co-founded Al-Anon, which is the 12-step fellowship for anyone involved with or connected emotionally to an addict. In Al-Anon, we say the only desire for membership is that there be a problem of addiction in a relative or friend, all right? So pretty much anybody gets to sign up to go to Al-Anon for sure. But Lois Wilson discovered in her codependent way that she was still running around behind her husband's addiction and not really focusing on her own life. And she needed to be in some kind of a 12-step fellowship where she was going to address her own issues around codependency, controlling. In Al-Anon, we talk about the 3 C's. We didn't cure it. We didn't cause it. We can't control it, and we sure can't cure it. We also talk about the 4 M's, as in Mary. There are 4 M's of Al-Anon: mothering, manipulating, managing, and martyring. How many times have I met a client who is actually the rational one, even though they're the alcoholic, but their spouse comes in, or their children come in, or their parents come in, and oh my goodness, the parents or the spouses are like, they're screaming at me, fix this person, and and then I'll say to them, well, you may want to consider going to Al-Anon. Oh my God, they're going to jump all over me. I just had a phone call last week from a potential new client who told me that their spouse is a sex addict. And I mentioned S-Anon because there is an Anon fellowship for the spouses of or other people involved with people with a sex addiction, all right? So I talked about that. She actually used the words, "you're wrong," to me. She said, "You're wrong. I don't need that. You can't make me go, and I don't think we're going to be a good fit." I'm like, well, you know what? You're probably right. Let me know if I can make a referral. That whole thing, I get that so much, But when people, if they choose to stay the course and, choose to stay working with me, If they get to a meeting or they get to maybe more than one, we always say try 6, 6 different ones to see if it's for you. Once they get there, the change in the tone, the change in their adaptability, their reasonability, the change in their willingness to discuss what can happen if they are having the support they need. So I'm much about why Al-Anon and Alateen and S-Anon and all those kinds of fellowships are equally as helpful for the families of or the spouses of or these other, people who are involved with the addict to get their own help and their own support. Okay? So continuing on, here's just a partial list of some other anonymous fellowships. I couldn't believe it. When I started looking it up to design this presentation, there's just so many. I mean, this is just a few. Clutterers Anonymous, there's a Hoarders Anonymous now. There's Debtors Anonymous, that's been around for a long time. Food Addicts Anonymous, GA, there's so many, just goes on and on. And each specific kind of, this is a good one, NAIL, Neurotics Anonymous for recovery from mental and emotional illness. I'm grateful to know that there is a 12-step program for people with those kinds of issues, all right? So there's so many. Online gamers, this is huge. I don't know if you know this, but we think of gaming as an issue in this country. In the Far East, there are treatment facilities for people with gaming addiction. And that's starting to come to our shores as well. We're starting to see more and more gaming addiction is becoming a real issue. I have clients that I'm working with who are teenagers, and we need to limit the games, and we need to talk about the raging and the withdrawal symptoms that go on with these kids, that they're talking about, what am I going to do if I can't play my game? So it's definitely real, all right? So continuing on, this is just a partial list again, and you can always look up any of these websites and find local meetings. With our technology, which is really wonderful, we now have telephone meetings as well, and there are online meetings. I participate in telephone meetings myself for the sake of time management. Telephone meetings are just like a conference call, just like this one. You call in and there's a PIN code you dial in, and then it's just a format. There's a moderator, and you follow a script just like you would in a face-to-face meeting. And what's wonderful about it is sometimes for people who are really reluctant to step into a meeting face-to-face, I have another tool that I can use as a therapist. And I'll say, for example, Overeaters Anonymous. I know where a couple of the really good OA meetings are here in the Denver area, but I've got clients all over my caseload talking about, I can't go to OA, I'm too ashamed to go, I won't go. Fine. What would you think about doing a phone meeting? Well, I'll give that a try. Sure. So now I have this other resource that has been developed with our technology to be able to introduce clients to some form of meeting if they're unwilling to go in person. It's a great start. So here's the 12 steps, all right? And I think a lot of us know them all by heart. I certainly do, but they're easily accessible online, and there are a lot of exercises you can do with your clients around these 12 steps. And why do we do them in order? People say all the time, can I just skip around? I got people coming in, I chuckle at this because it's been so long, that I've been doing this work, and it just amuses me sometimes. I'll have people come straight out of a detox or a rehab, right? And they come in, they sit down, and a lot of the rehabs, thankfully, are very 12-step oriented. So they may start doing some step work while they're in rehab. So right away they come in, they sit down in my office. First session, we're establishing rapport. The next thing I know, they're talking about how they have to call their mother immediately and make an amends. I'm like, all right, ho, slow your roll here. Making an amends is the 9th step. That's on the next slide. And you're not there yet, and you don't have to worry about it. But boy, oh boy, people are all about skipping over the steps. They want to get right to the amends. They want to, apologize for stealing someone's car. They want to apologize for all the wrong they did, et cetera, on and so forth. And what I say to people all the time is, take a pause, take a breath, and let's just do the steps in order, right? And I always talk about finding a sponsor to my clients, because sometimes clients want me to be their sponsor, and as their therapist, that's a dual relationship. So what I suggest to people, because they'll say they'll go to some meetings. I had a client years ago who told me this. She was working a really good program of recovery, going to 4 AA meetings a week, but she couldn't find a sponsor because she had a lot of trust issues. And she said, she kept asking me, why can't you be my sponsor? I trust you. All right, well, that's very flattering, but in your search for a sponsor, see if there's somebody in the rooms who sounds like me. So what we say in recovery is, in order to find a sponsor, look for someone who has what you want and ask how they are getting it. And that's how you find a sponsor. It's not you go up to somebody, your first AA meeting, and you say, hey, will you be my sponsor? No, you might go to a few meetings and just sit and listen. And that's when the wisdom really comes, We have a slogan in recovery that says, take the cotton out of your ears and put it in your mouth. right? Just listen to the message. So here are these steps, and we work the steps in order. You start with step 1, and constantly we're reworking the steps. One of the things to bear in mind is that there is no graduation, in quotes, from this program. We don't talk about, you'll hear people say, so-and-so is recovered. Well, kind of no, they're not. In thinking about 12 steps, we don't say someone's recovered. We say someone's recovering, because it's a continuum, and this is an action-oriented program. So we break down the steps, the 12 steps. We think about them in this way. The first 3 steps, steps 1, 2, and 3, are owning up to what happened, how it was. The second 3 steps, steps 3, 4, 5, and 6, are cleaning up, We're taking an inventory. We're sharing it with somebody else. We're looking at our character defects. The third 3 steps are making up. This is where the amends come in. We talk about wanting to ask our higher powers to remove our character defects, to the best of our ability. And then we talk about making an amends, making an attempt to say, how we may have done something and we might want to do it another way. The 4 3 steps are about spiritual awareness, keeping up with our traditions, keeping up with our step work, continuing to go to meetings, and just choosing this as a way of life, choosing this as a way to live life. So it's not just about, maintaining abstinence or maintaining recovery, but also about being honest, being willing to stay on this path. And as I told you, I share from my own experience, strength, and hope. I did not stay on this path when I first came around. We're very stubborn people. We say, what's the hardest surface in the world? An addict's head, We also say it's a simple program for complicated people, because we sure will complicate it. And here are some of the reasons why the 12 steps work. If you're willing to work the steps, here are the willingness. Look at the word willingness. That's pretty key. Willingness. The action. Willingness is action oriented. It's action driven. So here are the things we need to be willing about: to be honest, to take action, take direction and guidance, suggestions, to be humble, to have faith. Faith is all about having a higher power and understanding what that means. Reaching out to others, being willing to ask for help. I got in touch with some really hard sadness the other day, and I got on a telephone meeting to listen to the shares, and the voices were really soothing, and I started to be really emotional. I started to cry, and I knew that after that meeting what I needed to do was make an outreach call to somebody else in fellowship. And I reached out to somebody whose phone number I have, and we spoke for a few moments about just about recovery. It's just about being willing to ask for help, to reach out, to be able to say, I need help, I need to talk about my feelings. And with that, I was able to move through the feeling and get on to the next part of my day. And I was so grateful to have this opportunity to share experience, strength, and hope. And this person very generously shared with me her experience, strength, and hope. This last one, require willingness to focus on oneself. Many times we say this is a selfish program, and that really is true. And that may be counterintuitive to everything we've ever been taught. But in this willingness to focus on oneself, what we're doing is we're trying to get in touch with our own. It's mindfulness, basically. It's really about, what is my plan for the day? What are my needs today, and how do I take care of my own needs? I know for myself, when I start my day with recovery, my needs are getting met, and then I have that much more to give to the clients, to the people I love in my life, these kinds of things. So here are the first 3 steps again. First 3 steps, we always go back to keeping it simple, keeping it basic, going back to the first 3 steps. We admitted we were powerless over our addiction. Our lives had become unmanageable. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about the 2 problems. The addiction is actually the secondary problem. The feelings underneath are the primary, okay? All right, now skipping ahead, to the cleaning up part, this is steps 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then we're getting on to the third set of steps about making amends and making up. And then we're getting on to the 4th set of steps, which is steps 10, 11, and 12. Keeping up, keeping in the traditions, keeping in the room, staying at the meetings. A lot of times people will leave, and I've done this too, oh, well, my life is going better now. I don't really need the meetings anymore. Well, yeah, that doesn't work. So, working the 12 steps, right? So when we say working the steps, the steps need to be worked in order, and it's preferable to try to work the steps with a sponsor, somebody who's going to sit with you and talk to you about how the steps work, how to integrate them into your daily life. They may suggest different things. the suggestion that's made typically, as it says right here, is for males to have a male sponsor and females to have a female sponsor. That way, you're not going to get 13th stepped. That's a slogan or a concept in the rooms. We talk about 13th stepping sometimes. There is no 13th step. It's kind of like the 19th hole on the golf course. If somebody is 13th stepping you, what that means is they're using the rooms of recovery, the 12-step fellowships as a dating service, you know? So we don't want to do that. And each sponsor-sponsee relationship is different. You know, some people have a very directive sponsor who gives them specific, you know, guidelines and you know, direction to follow. Other people want a more gentle approach. That's why it's important to go back to find a sponsor, look for someone who has what you want, and ask how he or she is getting it. All right? So keep in mind, again, I'm sorry about that, fellowship. Okay, key word, big word. Fellowship. It's all about community. Fellowship offers a community of support and opportunities to connect with others in similar circumstances. Now, again, going back to Al-Anon, this is true for families also. Families with an identified patient, quote unquote, are looking for support. You know, what do I do? How do I respond to this? How do I handle this, right? This is really important. It's not just the addict who suffers. People around the addict, people who choose to love the addict suffer as well, right? So fellowship is so important. I use that word very strongly. Fellowship is so key. Community. In our therapeutic community, I organize a networking group for therapists, for marketers from the treatment facilities, for all kinds of people, and we get together once a month and we do different kinds of things. Sometimes we have a speaker, sometimes we have a case consult. We're all out here, many of us are out here in private practice. And how much of the time are we operating like cowboys? You know, we're on our own. So what a treat to be able to sit in a room with other people who are doing this work and just talk about the work. Sometimes we're humorous about it. You know, like I remember this one case consult meeting we had, and we talked about no-shows and how we handle that, you know, how we talk about referrals, how we talk about dealing with people who don't want to pay us. I mean, it's the same thing in recovery. One of the reasons that I'm so strong on wanting to have community is because of what I learned from fellowship. Fellowship has been so helpful to me because it helps me know I'm not the only person. I'm not alone. My sponsor and I talk about this all the time. We are not alone. And that's really true. You know, in OA, there's a little prayer. I don't know the whole thing by heart, but the first part of it says, I put my hand in yours, and together we can do what we could never do alone. And I love that prayer. It's really great. So here's another thing about recovery. There's a lot of literature in the rooms. There's a lot of literature online. You can buy literature at a 12-step meeting. You can also go to the 12-step fellowship website and buy literature there. And it's great to have the literature. There's so many different types. Of course, there's the big book. There's daily readers and devotionals. There's workbooks and pamphlets. There's all kinds of stuff available to people who are attempting a program of recovery, and many of us, myself included, do use the literature on a regular basis. Okay? So, okay, and here's the biggest tool of all, folks. Meetings. Meeting makers make it. Why are the meetings so important? For just what I said. You sit in a room, like I said, I'm never going to forget that very first meeting I ever went to, where I sat in a room in a hospital cafeteria with 100 other people. They had to pass a microphone around. And this is my first meeting, which was years ago in '91. Think of how long ago that's been, and I still remember it. I remember what the speaker was wearing. I remember how her voice sounded. There's that whole opportunity to keep hearing the message. In recovery, we say, I'm a slow learner and a fast forgetter. I need the message repeated a lot, right? So I keep going back. They say, keep coming back, and I believe that. So here are some of the slogans, and when I do this presentation in person, I provide a packet with a whole bunch of slogans. These are tools that you can use with clients. An exercise that I like to do is to give a client some slogans, or actually sometimes what I'll do with a client is I'll tear up the slogans into little strips of paper because I have them all printed out. And I do this when I chair slogan meetings in recovery, and I do this also when I do the face-to-face presentation of this 12-step thing. So anyway, what I do is I put all the slogans torn up into pieces of paper in an envelope, and I pass around the envelope, and everybody chooses a slogan. And then they share about it. And for those of you who are going to come hear me speak in person at Harmony on April 12th, we're going to do a version of this because it's really fun. And I also talk about God, a higher power, in this presentation, because what I'll say is, whatever slogan your higher power meant for you to have, that's why you chose the one you chose. So, coming attractions. Okay, moving on. So, why are the slogans helpful? I just think of them as talking points. It's part of the language of recovery. You know, we have a language, we have a dictionary of terms, we have definitions, and the slogans just go along with that. I can think of so many slogans that I like so much. One of my favorites is, don't quit before the miracle happens. I hear that all the time. Keep coming back, keep it simple, you know. The elevator is broken, use the steps. There are so many. And I just would love to share them all with you, but there's not enough time. Okay, let's get to the part where people, I promise you this is a true story. Just a few weeks back, sitting with a client, and they were telling me a story about a friend of theirs that was asking them if they would go to an Al-Anon meeting to just experience what they're experiencing. And the person told me exactly these three things. I'm not even kidding, verbatim. These three things. It's a cult, it's a religious organization, and I'm not the addict, so I don't need to attend meetings. This applies for people who are trying the non-fellowships or resisting the non-fellowships. Okay. No, it's not a cult, right? It's not a cult. It may seem like a cult to people because they hear people chant or they hold hands, but 12-step fellowships are not in the business of mind control. And if anybody has worked with any people who've been in a cult or has worked with anybody who's done cult research, there's a whole lot of different things that have to do with cults that are not true in recovery. You know, cults are not asking you for money. They're not asking you to bring more people. Cults are not about, it's a program of attraction, not promotion. So people in 12-step are not going out there and beating the bushes like the Moon Unification Church, if anybody's old enough to remember that one. I've been approached by people in cults to join their cult. Big difference. That's all I'll say. So, you know, it's not a cult, I promise. Okay. It's a religious organization. A lot of people come to a meeting and they'll hear the word God, okay? And so right away, they go to the knee-jerk reaction of what their perception of God is, basically, primarily, based on whatever religion they may have brought up in their childhood. And as an adult, they may have some serious issues with the difference between the God of the religion they were raised in, which they may be angry at that God, and what God in recovery is all about. So what I like to say to people is, yeah, sometimes we talk about the word God, but a lot of times I'll change it and I'll say higher power. So the concept of a higher power is whatever you need it to be. One of my clients years ago told me that their concept of a higher power is the strength of the meetings that they were going to. And the fact that they were choosing to work a program of recovery and do 90 meetings in 90 days, which is a great idea. When you're really new, like right out of the rehab, right out of the sober living home, it's a great idea to go to a meeting every day, you know? And people will say, well, I can't make a meeting every day. And I'll ask them, really? Did you have any problem going to the bar every day? Was it ever too cold? Was it ever too hot? Were you ever too busy to engage in your addiction-based behavior? And the answer is always no. Okay, so do you have enough time then to devote to recovery the same amount of energy you devoted to your active addiction practice? And, you know, oh, yeah, okay, I can do that. All right then, so we can try 90 and 90. But the concept of a higher power really jams people up. So I like to really park on those first three steps and really, really tune in to the whole steps 2 and 3 thing. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. That's step 2. And then step 3 is made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand God. Change the words higher power, whatever that is. We'll just stick and stay with those 2 steps until I really have a clear feeling that someone understands how a concept of a higher power can work. That is true. You know, there are times when I'll have clients say, well, you know, it's a really religious thing. They hit that God thing over the head pretty hard. Like, well, yeah, you know what? Sometimes they do. And another slogan that I like says, take what you like and leave the rest. This is really important. I can't say that for all the years I've been going to meetings, I liked every meeting I went to. But there was always something I took away that helps me get another day, right? So here's another thing about addressing the God issue. You know, it's important to keep an open mind. Take what you like and leave the rest. It's a personal decision. Every person's higher power is different. I have a higher power. My sponsor has a higher power. They may not be the same, and they don't have to be. That's really important. And that's easy enough to explain. Okay, The Anon Fellowship. I'm not the addict, so why do I need to go to these meetings, right? But as I've pointed out, how many stories have I heard from, for example, the wives of alcoholics? The alcoholic comes home and is sleeping on the couch, sleeping off a drinking binge, and the wife is screaming at the children. Who are the children afraid of? I think that's true. So this is why I tend to, get with, people who are coming in talking about a person they know or a person they're involved with in some kind of emotional way who has an addiction-based behavior. And right away, I'm going to talk about an Anon fellowship for them. Not everybody's going to buy into that. That's fine. But I do try to get people to go to Anon fellowships. And again, here's the wisdom of why it's really a good idea to know where the good meetings are. I know where the good meetings are. And I get reports back from my clients. If I hear about a meeting that used to be a good meeting and a client comes back in and says, ooh, I don't know if I like that meeting, I ask them to tell me more about why. Tell me more, because I want to know too. So I won't refer people to that same meeting in the future. Of course, everybody's, self-reporting and it's all subjective, but I still want to know, all right? So that's pretty important to be a resource for your clients too. Okay, and here are the Anon fellowship too. So many times I've sat in Al-Anon because I'm a member of that fellowship as well, and people come in, they're newcomers, and they're like, well, I'm here to figure out how to, stop my son from smoking weed. Okay, well, good luck with that. But we can tell you how to help you, we can tell you some ways that you might be able to help yourself. Well, I don't need that. I really just need to, to train my son not to smoke weed. Okay, well, stay and listen and see if there's anything you can take away from here. Okay, I said there's no graduation. Recovery is a journey. It's not about a forever thing. We talked about that. All right, now let's talk about the resistance. I've already said a number of things about resistance. I'm sorry, let me just go back up for just a second. Okay, resistance. Addict use and isolation, very important. I can look like anybody else when I go to a dinner party, but as soon as I leave that dinner party, if I'm not in recovery with a food plan, I'm scoring food for sure. We're certainly not ready to give up the addiction-based behavior because of the feelings I mentioned. And of course, addicts are fearful and highly resistant to change. Gee, does this sound like any of our clients? Right on. Okay. Now, the thing about addiction and relapse, as I said to you before, I had many relapses. So did my sponsor, actually. My sponsor called me on Monday the 20th to congratulate me on 10 years. And she was telling me that 2017 is the 20th year that she is back in the rooms since her last relapse. So we accept that relapse happens, and when relapse happens, we talk about it, and it's not as if we don't say, welcome back, welcome home, let's see if you can stick around longer this time. Let's see what happens. And again, very important to bear in mind, relapse begins in the mind long before the addict actually relapses physically. We're setting up for the addiction, for the relapse, long before we actually do it, okay? Attempting recovery, relapse when they become complacent about recovery, stop going to meetings, and glorify or romanticize their addiction-based lives. Very important. Okay. Anon fellowships, yes, we have emotional relapse. That's definitely true. Emotional relapse is just as important. Okay. Here's what I was talking about earlier. When I'm sending a client to a meeting for the first time, I tell them get there on time or even a little early. Be aware that somebody might come up and greet you if you're new. I always tell my clients, I had a client years ago who I suggested to her, she was attempting AA. And I said, you know what? And I do this all the time. Sit near the door. Sit near the door. Choose a seat near the door because that's your escape route. If you're really feeling squirrely about it or you're really feeling uncomfortable, sit by the door. And then just see if you can just stay inside your body and stay for the duration of the meeting. But as soon as the meeting's over, book out of there if you need to, It's not important what you hear or how you behave. It's important to just stay connected. That's so important. Now, as people stay with it, and they keep coming to meetings, I always say, there's a meeting before the meeting. That's when people come early and help set up the chairs or put out the literature and chit-chat for a few moments to get comfortable, to get to know each other. And then there's the meeting after the meeting. When I first moved here 6 years ago from Pennsylvania, one of the first things I did was connect to the recovering community. And I remember going to an Al-Anon meeting, one of my favorite ones that I tell everybody about. And after the meeting, I remember I was maybe there for maybe the second or third time. And I just walked up to a group of people. There were 3 or 4 women talking, and they just, in the tradition of fellowship, which was very nice, they opened a circle to include me, and they said welcome, and I just sort of listened. I listened to what their conversation was, because obviously they all knew each other, but that's what we do, try to get comfortable with the idea of just, standing and observing. 9 times out of 10, someone's going to say, hey, really liked what you shared, or, are you here for the first time, or is there anything we can do to be helpful to you? That's been my experience, and those are my favorite meetings, of course. Newcomers are the best people we know. Okay, so when we're managing addiction and addressing it in treatment, obviously, if we're becoming aware that addiction or compulsive behavior is causing disruption, we may need to reorient, and the addiction becomes the first priority. I can't do other work if, you know, we're having an addiction issue. We've got to figure out a way to create some boundaries around that addiction issue. And once we know, or once I know that the client is engaging in addiction, you know, addiction-based behavior, we're going to try to look at a 12-step resource to address that before we can proceed with whatever the other presenting problem was, okay? So 12-step programs, once again, you know, we want to have the websites handy. We might want to have a printed list for our clients that we can hand to them and say, hey, give these a try. As I mentioned earlier, we may want to go to meetings ourselves. Of course, I'm in recovery, so I do go to meetings, but that's not something you can't do. There's lots and lots of open meetings around here, tons and tons, and if you want any suggestions, I can certainly, you know, give me a call or contact me through my website. I'll tell you where some of the good ones are for yourself, or, you know, to be able to send your clients. I like to have newcomers packets available sometimes. All the fellowships have them. And sometimes you can pick up a couple if you go to a meeting yourself and hand them to your clients, and then they have some more information to read. I have mentioned this earlier. Ask clients for self-report about their experiences and make the meeting information a part of the treatment session discussion, okay? You may want to incorporate step work, and I have some handouts for that. What I want to do is I want to jump to an exercise at the end that I talked about earlier. So I've already given you a couple of exercises to work with, and this is just bibliography stuff. Here's a partial list of the meeting website. This is good to have, like I said. There are some films that are really good. My Name is Bill W. is terrific. That was a TV movie years ago that won a lot of Emmys with James Woods and James Garner as Bill W. and Dr. Bob Smith. Thanks for sharing. Great movie about sex addiction, clean and sober, cocaine addiction, 28 Days, Sandra Bullock, about being in treatment, Rachel getting married, Anne Hathaway. Very good movies. All of these are just, can't recommend them highly enough. Okay, this was a gratitude exercise that we do. Here's the feelings journal exercise I was telling you about. Okay, so in this feelings journal, and I do this myself every day, we're talking about lonely, angry, sad, and scared. These are the feelings that we're trying to avoid. So what I do is I have a regular journal where I write about the week and that kind of stuff, but I also have this feelings journal, and I create a conscious awareness and decision to do this every day. And you can do this with clients of any kind, but it really speaks to where you're getting to the root of how addiction-based behaviors are happening and why, okay? So we want to have a way to honor and value the feelings, all right, so that they're not ignored or neglected or stuffed down. For each day of the week, take a few moments to write down what feelings you woke up with and say a bit about what might be driving those feelings. Talk about how it sets the tone for the day. Also talk about the feelings again at the end of your day and how the day went with regard to feelings. Here's what it looks like, okay? Here's the example. So this is what I do. I keep mine on a thumb drive because I'm a faster typer than I am a longhand writer, but people may want to do it longhand. People may want to do it as a note on their phone, but I do this throughout the day. I do this throughout the day because I am aware, being in recovery, if I'm not going to put my head in the refrigerator, then I'm going to have feelings, because that's what recovery is about, is identifying and staying with the feelings. And the bottom line is I'm going to want to be documenting my feelings so I don't ignore them and so I don't eat over them. So as I told you the story of being sad, that's really important. You know, I didn't eat over that. I stayed abstinent over that, and I still had the feelings of sadness, and then I reached out for help so I could do something about it, you know? Okay. This is another worksheet exercise where we take apart the 12 steps and we write them all down, and then you have questions that you ask your clients about each of the steps. You can do this with clients for sure. I have it all put out here. I also have in this packet, when I do this presentation in person, I hand out a packet that has a lot of these worksheet exercises for you to use with your clients. You can request that of me if you would like it. But for each of these exercises, we're talking about, you know, how do you break it down for your clients? You know, how are you ready to talk about your step work? Made a list of all persons we had harmed. I'm going to skip ahead here to another one. Let me see here. Okay. Step 11, I like this one. Take a moment for prayer and meditation. How many people, if I were in a room, I would ask you to raise your hands. How many people spend time meditating every day? Prayer isn't about going to church or to synagogue or to mosque. Prayer may be something simple as saying the Serenity Prayer every day, or another prayer that you know, some kind of mantra, some kind of way that you have of connecting to something larger than you. For a lot of my clients, I like to use the example of the Force, going back to higher power. I like to use the example of the Force in Star Wars. And I remember in that very first movie, at the end of the movie, when Luke is going to destroy the Death Star and he's flying his plane into the Death Star, and there's that moment where he's got his hands on the controls, but for a moment he closes his eyes and he hears Alec Guinness's voice, Obi-Wan Kenobi's voice, saying in that British accent, "Use the Force, Luke," and he closes his eyes and he pushes the button, and of course his bomb, goes right into the payload, and boom, the whole Death Star blows up and he leaves. To me, that's a little bit about what the Force is like, what the higher power is like. I apologize. To me, it's really about something larger than I am, something that I can point to or think about or, turn over or just be aware of, okay? So take a moment for prayer and meditation, asking for knowledge of higher power's will for you. What did you discover? Okay? So that's something else to have. Now, Adult Children Anonymous, I want to just spend, 2 seconds on this. Adult Children Anonymous grew out of Al-Anon, and it used to be called Adult Children of Alcoholics. But what it ended up happening was the Adult Children Anonymous morphed and got larger and turned into ACA because people can have 12-step orientation or addiction-based behavior when they come from a family where an addiction or other family dysfunction is present, such as molestation, such as rape, such as, abuse of other kinds, physical, sexual, emotional, right? So ACA is a very good fellowship as well. There are laundry list traits that go along with being an adult child, and these are some of them. So I have this in the packet as well. I just wanted to review these with you. So these are very codependency-based traits, okay? And then here's a codependency quiz. Once again, if you want this from me, you can request it. I will try to get you a copy. This is something really good to do with clients. I also like to recommend Melody Beattie's book, Codependent No More. A wonderful book. She writes from somewhat of a 12-step perspective and orientation, and I like to talk about codependency with a lot of my clients, whether they are the addicts themselves or whether they are the family or friends or spouses of addicts, okay, and their answers are in there as well. Okay, this is just another little handout that I have about one day at a time, the idea of some of the principles of 12-step, and then I also have the principles in here. Okay, so how about, there's so much more. I could go on and on all day, but I only have 5 minutes. So how about if we move to questions? Would anybody like to ask any kinds of questions of me right now?
So Valerie, we're going to see if we can get some questions to come in right now, but I did have a question specifically
Sure.
about, as you integrate this 12-step concept into a residential treatment, what I'm finding is that there's a lot of residential treatment programs that are hiring clinicians who have strong mental health but very little 12-step backgrounds. And so how do you help get the primary care clinician who is working in a residential environment for the first time, who's heavy on the mental health but not so much on the 12-step substance abuse side, into this idea of integrating 12-step into a residential program? And that's like part one question. Part two is how do we address the questions that come up about 12-step really shouldn't be in treatment. It's really more of a support function that many times people have complaints that, do you want to have 12-step in residential treatment versus it being something that's more of a support function? I mean, how do you address the answer to that question?
Okay, so I used to work in a rehab like Harmony, and I saw examples of this on both sides of the fence. When I was a detox counselor, I worked with a team, and several of the team members on the detox side were not in recovery. Pretty much everybody on the rehab side, all the counselors on the rehab side were. And the difference in how the patients responded to the counselors, in my observation, this is just, self-report observation, subjective, how the patients responded to the counselors who were in recovery was completely different than how they responded to the people who were talking at them instead of with them. So I would start from there. If I'm not saying this isn't like an oncologist has to have cancer to understand, working with a cancer patient. But for me, it really, if a person's going to rehab and there is a 12-step premise, how much more comprehensive may their recovery and their treatment turn out to be, right? That's one. And the second thing is, going back to the first part of your question, you don't have to make it a requirement for clinicians to go to meetings, but I don't see why it could hurt, right? So if a clinician is not necessarily in recovery, again, it's about knowing your resources in the community. In fact, up by Harmony, I was to this meeting one time. Harmony takes clients to the Fall River meeting in Estes Park, and that is a wonderful meeting. I was there on the last Monday of the month one time when they give out chips, and a bunch of different people come from a bunch of different fellowships, and I know that a number of people who were at the meeting that night were counselors at Harmony, and I think it's so cool to be able to have this resource right in your backyard, that you can go to a Fall River meeting. I mean, sometimes all it takes is a little bit of fellowship within the treatment facility, one clinician to another, to say, hey, you know what, it's not a requirement, you don't have to go, but hey, this coming Monday night there's this really good meeting in Fall River. How about, staying after work and we'll go together, and then we can go for coffee afterwards and talk about it. It's that kind of way, just as we say, program of attraction, not promotion. But we may be able to say, come try it out, see what you think, and then it's just another way, another tool that we have in the toolkit in order to assist our clients. As far as addressing the part about does it make sense to have it in a recovery set, in an inpatient setting, gosh, I don't know. From my experience, the clients that I work with who come out of a treatment facility or sober living home where there is a strong emphasis on 12-step, they have a much better foundation for how to ask for help, how to reach for support, how to find guidance, especially if the people in their everyday lives don't understand what they're dealing with. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. Jill from Colorado has a question. Do you have experience you can comment on with LifeRing and clients involved in that fellowship, and do you refer to there in addition to AA?
I'm not real familiar with LifeRing. I know what it is. I do recommend sometimes, because I do have a number of clients who are Christian focused, and in the Christian churches, they have taken the 12 steps and kind of co-opted them a little bit, I'm not saying that in a negative way, into something called Celebrate Recovery. And I don't disagree with Celebrate Recovery. Me personally, I'm a purist. I like to go right back to the bedrock. If you really want to get this, just go to the 12 steps, go to the source, go to the well. But I do understand that many other programs have taken pieces and parts of the 12 steps, principles, traditions, steps, all that kind of thing, concepts, warranties, and have put their own spin on it. I don't disagree with that. There's something for everyone. At the end of the day, what I have found, again, after 25 years of working with addicts, is at the end of the day, people wind up where they belong, where they need to be. And if they're going to get something they can get and they get what they need, that's the most important thing. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. She said thank you. A quick question. So in regards to other abbreviated programs like Smart Recovery, or on the other side of it, questions related to Back to Basics, where there's Wally P. who developed a model where you could actually go through the entire 12 steps in a much shorter period of time versus this idea of it being sort of a step-by-step process. What are your thoughts around something like that as you're integrating that into a treatment program?
I would still want to work the steps in order. I think steps 1, 2, and 3 are essential. For me, 1, 2, and 3 are the bedrock of how people are going to get this right. And anytime I'm having a difficulty, either with a client or within my own work, I'm going back to steps 1, 2, and 3. Powerlessness is the key here. Powerlessness, not hopelessness. Powerlessness, big difference. It's really about 1, 2, and 3. In a rehab facility where you only have 30 days with a client, or you might only have 2 weeks with a client, I'm not going to try to get them to step 4. But I will talk a lot about 1, 2, and 3. I would love it if every client leaves treatment with a concept of a higher power. Wouldn't that be a beautiful thing? But not everybody's on the same page at the same time. Even if I can get a client to talk to me about powerlessness and what that looks like, and there are so many good exercises just around powerlessness. Powerlessness, gratitude, hopelessness, all those concepts kind of work together. And when people go to rehab, they're pretty much on their knees. They've been brought to their knees by their addiction. So why not start with the powerlessness place? And any program, whatever language they're speaking, whatever kinds of ways they've interpreted or extrapolated the 12-step concept, hey man, if it gets them in the door and it gets them out of the door to go on to the next series of steps, maybe they will start going to a 12-step fellowship, whatever we can do to send them out of the rehab with a set of tools to navigate when they have to go back to real life and real problems and their real families and real jobs. You know, that's pretty important. Does that help?
Well, it does. Thank you so much, Valerie, and we want to thank all of you who've had the opportunity to spend some time with us today. Valerie, if you want to skip to the end of your deck so that people have a chance to see how they can get in touch with you, that would be great. In the meantime, for those of you that were on the call today and a part of the webinar, we will be making this webinar available to folks on our website, so you will be able to get access to the deck. Additionally, we will be providing you with copies of, with certificates of completion. You should be receiving an email with an invitation to complete the evaluation. Yes, someone's just asked if the slides will be available. Valerie, you're comfortable with us sharing these slides?
You know, we can talk about that afterwards, and I can make a decision about that. Okay?
Sounds good. And for the next webinar series, we are scheduled for April 26th, and we have Sandstone Care, Mary Margaret Broad, who's going to be talking about integrative medicine with an adolescent treatment. We're really excited about the launch of our webinar series. We want to thank Valerie again for helping us kick this off. If you all have any additional questions, or if you would like to learn more about what we're doing here at Harmony Foundation, please don't hesitate to look us up at harmonyfoundation.com, harmonyfoundationinc.com, or you can call at 970-586-4491. Thank you, Valerie, and thank you, everyone else.
Absolutely. And if people want to get in touch with me, the link to my website is at the bottom of every slide. It's www.bodymindandbalance.com. That's the best way to reach me. You can contact me there. And the and is A-N-D. Anything else I can do before we say goodbye?
I think that's it. I think we're good. Thank you again.
Okay. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Thanks for letting me present. Bye.